This is Hulk vs Thor, the Gladiator mech match. I was inspired to do it by GTS, the Gumpler Talk Show. They're having a singularity event competition where basically you can build anything, and it's themed around Thor Ragnarok. You're a gladiator on a planet, you've got a pile of junk, go build. So I got out my pile of 30-minute missions. These are really simple, easy kits to build and great fun. But can I do one in 30 minutes? Short answer, no. If I had just cut it out quickly, then I probably could have got it done in 30 minutes. But I like to do a really good job on these. I'm going to be painting them, and it is for a contest. So by the time I'd cut everything out with a set of nippers, trimmed it a bit more with another set of nippers, and then sanded every single nub flat, before I knew it, 2 hours had passed. Well, on to the next thing. I'm adding on some option armour because I want to bulk up Hulk, and he looked a little puny, to be honest. And Thor can be puny, but Hulk has to be big. I tried this helmet, but I gave it to Thor. I added some bulk to his left shoulder, kind of like the film, beefed up his chest, and gave him this shield. Time to do Thor. I had this, it's the same kit, but it's got like a submarine version or something. I built up another packet of option parts. That chainsaw looks good. Then I did a few more option parts before finally doing a new Thor. The other one just looked too similar. I may have got a bit carried away. Just a little bit. As these are supposed to be bashed together, I swapped a few feet, swapped over the odd arm, swapped the heads around, and I wanted Hulk to be literally tearing this mech apart by its legs. So I added a couple of extra arms to the back. Didn't quite go as planned, but it was a great idea. I glued any pieces that were going to have ugly seam lines together and left them on the side to set up. Now, going the extra mile includes lighting up the faces. Take note when you do this what voltage your LEDs are. I should have known I was going to have problems with the green ones. The soldered leads just kept falling off. They were so small. Now's the time to fill any of those unsightly seam lines with a little bit of putty. When it's set, just sand it smooth. So that's Thor, but Hulk needs a much bigger head. Now, if you can guess where this came from, go rush and put it in the comments below and then come back and I'll tell you the answer. Okay, so I had a few Phase 2 Clone Wars helmets, and I just thought, you know, if I slice that on some of the lines, it's got the little flaps hanging down, it'll be great. Sadly, the flaps were a little too long, and I just had to saw them off. I covered both the clear eye lenses with some liquid mask to stop them getting sprayed with paint, which would kind of defeat the point of them being clear. I'm still on a mission to make Hulk a bit bulkier. So I thought, why not add a skirt? You know, one of those gladiator pointed type skirts that you see Russell Crowe wearing so fetchingly. So I just cut up some thin bits of styrene, it's probably something like 0.25, and cut it into the right shape. I detailed them up by drilling some holes and scribing some lines. And then, new piece of styrene, more holes, more lines, and I had a belt. Then all I had to do was glue them in place, left a bit of space at the front for his codpiece, whatever we're calling it, and I was done. Sadly, this side broke, but I was able to cover it up with these sort of shoulder attachment pieces. I snipped off the nubby bits and glued them in place. I wanted to give Hulk a crest, so out came a pie tin. Perfect. I cut it up, scrunched up a couple of pieces, so they fit on top of his helmet basically, and glued them together with 5-minute epoxy. Before you know it, you've got a crest. Now the fun bit, time to whip out the Dremel and damage them all up. Yep, time to make them look like battle-weary mechs. I made sure I only scuffed areas that were actually likely to get hit by the opposition. So we're talking outsides, anywhere where a sword might hit, shields, weapons would get a bit battered, but I didn't do his back that much, and I didn't do the inside of his legs, for example. And once I was happy with the level of damage, I sanded off any excess, because melted plastic is not a good look when you're trying to produce something that looks like it's been hit with a weapon. I really didn't like this seam line and I hadn't glued it previously, so I covered it with styrene strip. Time to get painting. First, I cleaned off all my finger grease with a bit of, well, dishwashing soap and ultrasonic cleaner. Works a charm. Once they're dry, handle them with gloves to not put any more oils back on, and I clipped each piece individually onto these. They're like metal spikes with crocodile clips on the end. You can buy proper painting ones, but these are for place cards, for dinner parties, should you ever get back to doing those. And every single piece needs to be clipped and put in place and organised so you know what colour to paint them in a minute. Cue mammoth painting montage, which I will summarise very quickly because it's actually quite boring watching people airbrush paint. So I started off with pink and grey primer. Pink to go into red and yellow because otherwise it looks a bit lemony and insipid. Not good look. That was day one. Day two was base coats. This was a 6-hour day of painting with a huge organic solvents mask because I'm using lacquer paints. Things that move a lot, it's very easy to scratch acrylics off. I know that loads of people do acrylics successfully, so it's probably just me. I really like the way the lacquers paint through an airbrush, but you have to have really good extraction and face masks. So don't do this at home unless you've got that kind of equipment. But I did some red base coats. I did some black base coats. These are both gloss and going under my metallics. I then moved on to the just plain base coats for the areas that aren't going to be nice and shiny. A lot of green, a lot of green, a lot of different colours of green. And after a couple of hours of green, thankfully I was able to do a different one. Purple. Purple's for his shoulders really, it's just an accent colour. Now this is the pink primer, you can see it's really great, and I'm putting it under brown here. I did a flat brown, which is very matte finish. I experimented a lot here with the base coats for metallics, and some of the brown ended up as a base coat under the metallics, and it gives a lovely matte feel to the metallics that you don't get with the gloss. But anyway, enough of that, on to putting on the metallics. This is silver going over a gloss black. I'm actually going to paint this purple in a second. I wanted Thor in reds and golds, and I used gloss red as a base coat for a lot of copper. I am in love with copper. It looks gorgeous, especially over this red base coat. The gold also looks really rich over it. But I also did it over the brown and the gloss black, and you can see the difference when they're done between them all. I did all the chrome over the gloss black. These areas are all frames and weapons, things that you might expect to be in chrome, except if you're Thor, he's got that bling copper going on. Back to the purple. This actually came out a bit dark, especially on the helmet. It's an enamel candy colour. I will thin it next time so it's a little bit lighter. And then finally, when all that was done, I put a top coat on everything. Some of it was gloss, some of it was matte, just to get different effects, even over the metallics. And when that was done, I sat down and had a cup of tea. Well deserved. But this, sadly, is only half the pieces. I didn't have enough of those party clip holders, so I had to take them all off, and I just put them, because they're in like sets of arms and legs, I put them into little plastic cups and put them on the side and did the whole thing again with all the rest of the pieces. But this time, yellows and oranges snuck into the mix. Time to tip out those pieces and assemble it all. This is going to take a while. This is 5,000 times sped up, and I'm really proud of the fact I didn't really need to use the instructions to put it back together. Win. So Hulk, then Thor, then I'm going to spare you the rest of the pieces. Now, one of the big problems with having LEDs is working out how to get the wires to them. I just glued Hulk in place, but I left Thor floating a bit. He's going to have a cloak to hide it all. Time to make these boys look like they've been fighting in a gladiatorial match. First up, the legs. Now, I started with these because they're pale yellow. And before I really show you what I did, I need to thank Michael Rinaldi. Go check out his live streams if you want to know how to do oil weathering. But it's quite simple. You put on oils, and you don't need the number I put on this palette. They looked exciting and they looked good on a video, but actually I really only used burnt umber, a little bit of orange, and a silver wax, a true metal by AK Interactive. And these are just normal artist oil paints. You put them on the cardboard so the oil comes out so they're not as glossy. You have a little bit of terps, I love the smell, or odourless thinners, and you basically paint all your chips and weathering in. It's quite long-winded, but it achieves great results. And if you dampen another brush with just some more of this terps, then you can easily wipe off any mistakes and get things just a little bit finer and a little bit thinner. It's one of the most versatile methods for weathering. I've used it a lot in the past, but I haven't used it recently. So Michael Rinaldi, thank you for reminding me how much I love this and for your excellent tips on how to do it. The other thing I like to do with oils, and it's what I've generally done a lot in the past, is washes, and you just dilute it with a lot of terps. Probably don't need this much on. I was a little bit excited and put too much on, but basically the principle is there. You dilute it till it's really thin and it sits in all the low areas like a wash. I did put a much more detailed video on this up for my patrons and channel members, so if you're interested, consider supporting me that way. And what a difference it makes. Wow, look at the bottom leg compared to the top leg. Such a difference between even only partly weathered here and the completely unweathered but painted plastic. And because I'd squeezed out all that red oil paint onto my palette, I used it on the crest and I added it in while I was doing Thor. But the key to weathering is layers, loads of them. So when that was dry, I went on and added some metal onto the really worn edges. Not everywhere, you don't want to overdo it. So this is a true metal, gunmetal colour by AK Interactive. It's a wax, I think, but it thins with terps fine and just brushes on like an oil paint. And I used it, as I said, on all the worn edges. Finally, some edges got orange. Just a little bit of variety, a fresher type of rust. Time to do those final finishing touches. On went his crest. It wasn't very even, so I did trim it and 5-minute epoxied it in place. Now, confession time. I lost a hand. Yep, I lost a whole hand. I don't know where it went. And I've not found it since. So out came the blue tack, and on went one of Thor's weapons that I was going to put a staff on. It's actually an axe, so it's painted up for Thor. It's all blingy copper. But you know, Hulk's picked it up and used it. That's my story, and I'm sticking with it. But there's a downside to this. I can't now have Hulk ripping apart that droid because he's only got one hand on the back. So I put everything together, put all those little extras on and had a play with what do I do with the droid. And then I had the challenge of gluing these legs in place. He's got a closed fist. There's no other hands. I ended up cutting the back off. And no, it's the back. Just imagine it's going through a loop on his toes and we'll all be happy. And now it's time to arrange all of these bits onto some kind of base. Out came my favourite type of base, a box frame. I protected the frame with some masking tape and then I needed to seal that plywood so it doesn't warp. It has done it on me in the past. So I put down some PVA glue, which is great for sealing. The Hulk needs to be a lot bigger than Thor, so I added some polystyrene in the middle to create the illusion that he was bigger, as he's actually the same height. Now, I've been chuntering away at the back of my mind that I shouldn't have used PVA to seal this, as it will just re-wet and let the water through. So I'm using the Black Magic Craft official sealing for everything concoction, which is basically, in his case, black acrylic, artist paint and matte Mod Podge. So I got out an old tub, added a ton of matte Mod Podge. I didn't want black though. I don't really use black that much, so I used raw umber acrylic paint instead and plastered it everywhere. I'm suddenly getting chocolate cravings. For the actual ground, I mixed up my favourite product for scenery, tile grout. This is taupe by Larson, and I mixed it with some PVA, quite thin white glue. Basically, you can mix up a paste, it's a tad thick, so I did add some water for the middle, so it does look like two different textures, which is, you know, just one of those things that happens. Once I'd covered everything, well, Hulk's been a naughty boy and he has smashed this poor mech, the yellow and orange one, into pieces. So it only seemed fitting that he would have pounded them into the ground. And the brass, well, they're gnarled nuts. After an afternoon sunning itself in my sunny porch, it was dry enough for me to be able to get on. So I played at putting Hulk on, putting Thor on, seeing where they all fitted. These guys are a little unstable and I want them in action poses, so I'm gluing them down, which means I can drill some holes to put the wires for the LEDs in permanently. Inspired by Boil Eye Hobby Time's continual use of them, I'm using tea lights. They have a simple on-off switch and they give out just enough power for my 2 LEDs. I snipped off the existing LED, soldered on some new longer wires so everything would reach, and turned it on. It's off camera, both my face and Hulk, but you can't see my look of exasperation as the LED just went on and then blew out. Oh, a quick check of the bag. It's 1 to 2 volts, not 3. So I snipped off the wires to the old LED, drilled out a new hole, put in a 3 volt, sadly golden yellow, not lime green LED, did a quick test, then soldered it up. With its head back on, I can turn the light on. It just looks really insipid. It doesn't look that great. So a quick paint of Tamiya clear green gives it that hue that I want. Disaster rectified, and it only took half an hour. Whew. I hot glued the T-line in place and set about putting the guys in place. I wasn't sure how to glue them and I used hot glue. I knew when I put the next layer on with water this may cause issues. It may cause the hot glue to release. And guess what? It did release, that is. But hey, hot glue is quick and easy and you can cover it with a bit of tar grout. I put on his 2 back arms and I'm going to admit it took me a week and a half before I was really happy with the placement of this yellow and orange droid. It just got in the way of all my photos and I'd take a set of photos and I'd look at them and I'd go, oh, it looks odd, and I'd take them off again. So for the moment, it's up in the air. By the end, he's smashing it, puny god style, into the ground. Onto the home stretch, so a sprinkling of beige tile grout and taupe tile grout and a little bit of a paintbrush to flick it around, and this is just to give it a dusty effect. I also cunningly used tile grout to build up around the hot glue to hide it. A little bit of tile grout brushed over those feet also helps tie them into the base. Each kit had one of these, so I'm calling them referees and putting them on the base. I secured everything with my normal mix of isopropyl alcohol and water, about 1/3 isopropyl alcohol, 2/3 water. That helps the glue to flow better, and for the glue I used about 1/6 matte Mod Podge and 5/6 water. Sadly, it didn't flow that well and neat tile grout in the UK is unsanded, so it rarely does, so I spent a lot of time mopping up the excess liquid. Finally, as expected, Thor gave way. Yes, the hot glue released because of the liquid, so I caught him and then just propped him up with a lot of weights. A day for drying, and off came the masking tape, and I was good to go. But wait, Thor's missing his gorgeous red cloak. Time to dress this boy up. Little bit of white jersey. I don't have any bright red clothing I can cut up for him. Well, I'm not donating a t-shirt. So out came this jersey. It drapes very nicely. Then, looking more like something out of a horror movie, on went some bright red ink. This worked wonderfully. And before long, I had Thor's cloak, which I could just leave on the side to dry. And one of the benefits is putting this ink on actually stiffened it, so it held its folds really nicely when I came to fold it. I used fabric adhesive, it's Fabri-Tac, to glue the sort of folds at the top, and then I scrunched it up because it was actually way too wide at the top, and glued all that in place. And then I test fit it, and it was a tad long, so I just trimmed a bit off the bottom. A bit of tile grout and oils weathering, and the cloak was done. Whilst I was thinking about it, I added in a couple of wires to the top of this droid so it looked like he'd been wrenched apart. I put a little bit of tile grout on his feet, but then moved him to that smashing into the ground pose. Now he only reaches with just his bare foot, but to give it an impact, I added some polyfibre. It's not ideal, so I powdered it with a bit of tile grout just to give the sort of dust cloud effect of him hitting the ground at great force. A quick spritz of just isopropyl alcohol and water sealed it all in place. Great as these 30-minute mission kits are, I have a pet peeve with these holes. They're there to add accessories, but if you don't have any accessories, they're just a hole. So I created some spikes in Blender. It's just a simple free, it's not simple, it's a free 3D program. And then I went and printed them in resin, and basically ended up with a whole set of spikes of various different sizes. Oh, I just couldn't be bothered to get out the airbrush for a few spikes, so I used a Molotov chrome pen. It's very good for adding chrome to basically small details on a model. It's not so great for big areas like this, it looks a bit blobby, but hey, it looks great when weathered in. So I use that, and I also use some Tamiya paints, just in various titanium, gold and sort of chrome colours. Super glued them in place and weathered up with a few more oils. Finally, I took those leftover oils and splattered them over the base. A little bit of Mech blood, sweat and tears going on there. Then I was done. So don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell button, and thanks to my patrons and YouTube channel members for all their support. See you next time.